Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I am very excited today to be able to share with you all of the books that I read in the month of June. As you can see from this pile, I had quite a few reads this month, and I also have quite a few that are going to be on my Kindle, so I'll talk about those when I get to those. So I think I'm just going to go back and forth between books that I read on my Kindle and books that I read physically and just review them all for me. It was kind of a mixed month. I would say I had kind of a little bit of a reading slump right at the beginning, and then I had trouble figuring out what I wanted to read. I ended up reading some things that I wasn't even planning to read, but overall, I had a pretty good time with my reading, and let's go ahead and get started. So the first book that I ended up reading in the month of June, I actually started it at the very end of May, and that is Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. It took me about 9 days, so that was a third of my month probably spent reading that one. And I have to tell you that I gave the first two books in Stormlight Archive a 5-star, and I ended up giving Oathbringer a 4-star, and I'm going to explain to you why. Doesn't mean I didn't like it. Coming out of Words of Radiance, by the way, I'm not going to spoil anything in Stormlight Archive, I'm just going to be general, but coming out of Words of Radiance, I felt like we had really built up to this exciting climax, right? And we're in this new place and we're going to have all this stuff going on, and we've just really opened up the story. And I feel like that was definitely true, but I also feel like that was part of what gave me some trouble getting into it at the beginning, because Brandon Sanderson at the beginning of this book was clearly very focused on making sure that he set up the world, because we were basically just focused on mostly the Shattered Plains and the war that was happening there. And now we've opened up the world. But what is the world? What are all these other kingdoms? What are the people in them? What are the rulers like? So we're learning about all of that. We're also learning about this new place. And so it really felt a little bit slow to me. And I had a difficult time getting through it. In particular, I had a difficult time with Shallon's chapters. People always said like she was not their favorite character. And I was always like, why? Shallon's awesome. Why do you not like her? And, you know, in this book, I kind of got it a little bit. She did bother me a little bit in this book. She was not my favorite part of the book. But what I did love about the book was that it was really Dalinar's story. We really get his backstory. We learn what's going on with his memory. The reveals were not something that I was expecting, and it was very emotional, and I really, really loved it. And as always, Brandon Sanderson is excellent at building up to the end of his book, right? The climax of this book was so exciting and made it worth it. But to be honest, if you were to ask me, I would say that I feel like this book is at least 200 pages longer than maybe it needed to be. Don't come after me, Sanderson fans. I am one of you. But it was a little slow. Not sorry I read it. Still love the series, but was a little bit less of a favorite for me than the first two books. And moving on to something very, very different, I read The Witchwood Knot by Olivia Atwater. This was not something I was expecting to read this month. It was not on my TBR. Last weekend, Sean and I went down to Louisville and we went to a bookstore. It's called, I think it's called A Novel Romance. Yes, you can see I got a sticker from it for my Kindle. It's called A Novel Romance. It's in J-Town, which is a suburb, kind of a separate city that's associated with Louisville. Anyway, and it was so cute. It was adorable, and I had to buy something. Obviously got some stickers for my Kindle, but then I also bought this book. It is independently published. It doesn't have a ton of ratings on Goodreads, and I am really sad about that because I loved this book. It is a Victorian Gothic story. There is a mansion, I won't say a crumbling mansion because it's not really crumbling because it's pretty new, but there is a mansion that there are weird things going on in. There are fairies, but they are dark fairies. They're not sexy fairies. I just really loved it. Our main character is Winnie. She has arrived at this mysterious manor, and her plan is to be a governess for the young lord of the house. Now, we do find out that she's not really a governess. She's kind of there under false pretenses. The boy's grandmother has asked her there to try and figure out what is going on, which of course she does eventually. This is a romantasy. There is no romance whatsoever for probably the first 50-60% of the book, which is what I kind of prefer. There's a lot of world building. There's a lot of other characters that are really interesting. And when the romance happens, it's a very slow burn. There's no spice. There's like 2 kisses. It was perfect. I just really loved it. And there is an undead cat named Oliver. And there's the chapter headings in the book are all, let me see if I can get this up there. They're all skeletal cats at the beginning of the chapter. And he is wonderful, and I love him, and I want to know how I go about getting an undead cat of my own. But anyway, I had read Half a Soul, which is from her Regency fairy tale series. This is in the same universe, but it takes place later in the timeline. I liked this much better. I'm much more a Victorian than a Regency girl anyway, and this just really, really worked for me, and it was a big surprise, and I cannot recommend that you pick it up enough. Okay, moving on to another Kindle book. I read a new release, and that is Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Service Model is the story of Uncharles. Uncharles is a service model. He is a robot who has been created to be a valet for essentially very rich men in this world, which may be our own world, maybe set sometime in the future. That's not really clear. And through a series of circumstances, something has happened to Charles's master. And now he finds himself on the street and unemployed. All of his programming is telling him that he needs to find another household immediately. Unfortunately, he finds himself unable to do so. I just love robot stories so much, and this was a great robot story. The book itself is it's separated into 5 parts, and Tchaikovsky chooses to tell each part in the style or as an homage to a different author. And I have the list of authors here, and we have Agatha Christie, so there's a little bit of a locked room mystery in one part, Kafka, Orwell, Borges, and Dante. And that's a really diverse group, and I have to tell you, like, that's not super obvious necessarily when you're reading the book, but if you know that and you read the book through that lens, it makes it even better. It was something different. It was something fresh. It was a new take on that kind of tired cliche about the robots who rise up against their masters. That's not exactly what it is. You think that's what you're getting going in, but it's not. It's something actually very, very different and very philosophical. So if you are someone who enjoys a little bit of philosophy in your science fiction, I think this would be a good one too. This was my second novel by Adrian Tchaikovsky. The first one was Children of Time, which I didn't love just because I'm not really a spider person, but this one I loved. And now I am thinking, what of his books should I read next? So if you have a recommendation for me, if you've read a lot of his books, because he is a very prolific writer, please let me know what your favorite is and maybe I'll check it out. So I made a vlog about my trip to the romance novel bookstore that you'll be able to check out, where I got the Witchwood Knot. And so as part of that vlog, I actually read romance novels for an entire week. And the one that I started out with in that vlog is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Casey McQuiston wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is kind of like a little bit of a fanficky take on what if someone fell in love with the Prince of England, I think, if I remember correctly. And I really loved it. I thought it was adorable. The setup of this book is that we have a girl named August who has just moved to New York City. She gets an apartment, gets these roommates who kind of become a little bit of a found family with her. And then she meets a girl named Jane on the subway. And she doesn't think anything of it at first. Jane's a little bit punk rock. She's a little bit retro. And she's always on the train when August is on her way to her classes. But then as it turns out, Jane actually is stuck on the train, and she has been since the 1970s. So that's the setup of the book. They fall in love. They're going to be able to get Jane off the train. Is she going to have to go back to the 70s? Is she going to stay here? There's a whole lot of stuff. There's also a plot line about saving a famous pancake house in Brooklyn. Why not? And overall, I would say there's a lot here. It's very long. I would say for a romance novel, it's over 400 pages long. And unfortunately, this was not the book for me. It was very spicy, which I was not expecting necessarily. I feel like these cartoony covers always get me. Like, you never know what you're getting when you go into a book, right? It's always like, they're all cartoony, so who knows what's going to be on the inside. And I was not prepared for the fact that all of the spicy scenes in this book take place on the subway, which is not hygienic, and it didn't work for me. And I couldn't get past that. I also didn't really care about the love story between Jane and August because I felt like it was very kind of insta-lust, which is, again, not a thing that I am terribly into in my romance novels because I like a slower burn. And I don't mind spice, but I don't want it to be on the subway because that's gross. This is not really one that I would recommend, but I would recommend her other book very highly. The next book that I read is A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This book has been so hyped up for me. Everyone has told me, oh, you love found family, you love cozy, you love sci-fi, this is going to be your favorite book ever. And for me, it was just kind of okay. I'll get that out of the way. It wasn't my favorite book of all time. I felt like it was very, very Firefly inspired. I'm a big fan of the TV show Firefly, but it felt like it was really, really Firefly inspired. Maybe a little bit too much for me. And I also felt like it was very episodic. We have this group of ragtag individuals who were on a spaceship, and they have taken on this major mission. We are told that it's going to be really difficult. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be really hard on them. And they meet up with some difficulties along their way, but it kind of feels like all of those difficulties are solved in about 15 pages. There are just no stakes. And I find that with cozy books, the ones that are just like, we don't have any stakes, there are no stakes here, are not the ones that I particularly enjoy. I need there to be a little bit of drama in order for me to really care about the rest of the story. So it was just too low stakes for me. I also didn't feel like I really connected with any of the characters in the way that I wanted to connect with the characters. This is a book that if you're looking for cozy sci-fi, I would still recommend. My number one cozy sci-fi recommendation right now is actually The Floating Hotel. Actually, I think it's just Floating Hotel by Grace Curtis, which I read earlier this year. And it's kind of similar in that it is a found family, in that case on a hotel that flies through space, and in this case on a spaceship. But that was very similar. But that one worked for me, and I connected to the characters on a deeper level. But I know that people love this series, and I don't want to throw a lot of shade at it. It just wasn't the book for me. So, okay, moving on, I have to talk about the 2 books that I DNF'd before I go on to some more books that I loved in the month of June. And the first one is going to be Wolfsong by TJ Klune. So I love TJ Klune. I love The House in the Cerulean Sea. I love Under the Whispering Door. Under the Whispering Door in particular is just one of my favorite books ever. So when I saw that his werewolf series, kind of werewolf romance series, was being republished, I thought, I will try that. But I think what I forgot is that I don't like werewolf romances because the pack hierarchy, the kind of alpha, is not for me. It is just not for me. It is not my thing. If it's your thing, I am happy for you, but it's not my thing. So I kind of realized a little ways into this that this wasn't really going to work for me. There's also an age difference between 2 of our characters that just kind of bothered me in terms of power balance. I did not finish the book. I'm not going to be continuing the series. I think the cover is so gorgeous. Love that. And I'm definitely going to be reading his other books, just not his werewolf series, because I don't think werewolves, I don't think they're for me. That's okay. And the other book that I DNF'd in the month of June was A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Meadows. This one made me really sad. Let me tell you what it's about first. So it is the story of an arranged marriage in a fantasy world. It's kind of got similar themes in terms of that arranged marriage as Winter's Orbit, which I read last month, might have been 2 months ago, which I absolutely loved. I think those books have very similar themes, but this one had something that I could not overlook, and that is the fact that in the second chapter, there is an essay, and it is fairly graphic, I would say. And there is an author's warning at the beginning of the book that says that that is going to happen and that the story is kind of about the recovery from that. But I didn't see that, first of all, because I actually was reading not this copy, but the copy that I have on my Kindle to start with. And it started me after that point, because you know, when you open your Kindle, it's like time to read, straight past all that stuff. So I didn't see it. So I was not prepared for it. And then I went back and saw it after I read it. And then I tried to continue on. But for me, I could tell that it was kind of going to be this story of trying to get over the trauma of that. It all takes place within a fairly compressed, I would say, period of time. It just was not what I wanted out of my romance. I didn't like that being something that was used as something for the love of the 2 main characters to overcome. It just bothered me. So this one did not work for me. And unfortunately, I bought a copy because I was so convinced I was going to love it, which I never do. And now I'm going to have to sell this on Pango or something because I'm not going to read it. But that would be my warning for that. I would just look up content warnings and be aware, because I honestly was not aware before I started reading that there were some things that I was going to not want to see. So fair warning. Okay, so moving on to books that I really loved, I read A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This was not on my original TBR that I did in my video last month, but it was actually on my TBR because it is the book that I'm going to be using for participated in a book club on our fantasy. One of the book clubs in the Our Fantasy sub on Reddit read A Study in Drowning for June, and I had actually started this book. It might have been in January, or it might have even been last year when it came out. I can't quite recall when I started to read it, and I DNF'd it pretty early on, I think right about the time that she got to the house, because I felt like it was going to be very young adult and very tropey, and I was like, ugh, not another one of these. I'm not into this, and I quit. Kind of a soft DNF because I was like, maybe I'm just not in the mood, and it turns out that I was just not in the mood, because when I came back to this, I absolutely loved it. So our main character in A Study of Drowning is Effie. Effie is a student at a college. She is an architecture student, but really she wanted to be a literature student, but could not be because in the world where she lives, women are not allowed to study literature because it is kind of thought that they are not capable of creating great literature. So one day, on the notice board at her college, she sees a notice that there's going to be a contest for someone to design a new house for the author, or the heir of the author of her favorite book of all time. And this book is, I would say it's kind of, I would say it's Lord of the Rings inspired, but it would, if Lord of the Rings had more of a focus on romance. That's at least how it felt to me. Against all the odds, she is the one chosen, and so she's sent to this crumbling mansion, which, as you know, is one of my favorite things, on the sea, to find out eventually what is going on there, to design this house. While she's there, she runs into a rival student from the literature college at her university who is there to write a thesis on her favorite author who has passed away. It's kind of billed as enemies to lovers, but I mean, they don't like each other for like 3 days. I mean, it's not, right? It's very clear early on that they're going to team up and they're going to solve the mystery of what is going on at this crazy house, because man, is there some stuff going on at this house. So we meet the son of the author. There's something weird about him. Effie herself is living in a guest cottage with an iron bolt on the door, which is supposed to be one of those things that's supposed to keep out fairies, that kind of thing. Are there fairies? There are fairies, and not the nice kind, again, which, as you know, my kind of fairy. I just really love this book. Ava Reid's writing is very luscious and sumptuous and poetic. I would say that the book is very interested in themes of feminism, which sounds kind of surprising for that, but Effie is very much someone who is not allowed to be who she is because she is a woman. She's not allowed to be a writer. She's not allowed to study literature. And we see men, particularly men who have power over her in some way, trying to take advantage of her throughout the book. And it is a story of healing. You know, going back to my DNF in A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, which I didn't like, it dealt with a lot of the same themes. But in the case of A Study in Drowning, I felt like the themes were treated seriously. They were treated seriously in terms of Effie's mental health, which is honestly not amazing. It didn't feel like something that was there for a love interest to help her get over, to make them love each other. It felt like something that she was going to have to deal with no matter what. And I really loved that, because that was not something that I expected at all to come from this young adult fantasy book that looks kind of like all the other ones if you look at the cover. It was just really great. I just really loved it. The ending was perfect. I gave it 5 stars. Totally unexpected 5-star. I mean, I raced through this thing. I read it in 24 hours. It was so good. And I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you are fans of Gothic stories, things like Rebecca, things like The Witchwood Knot that I also read this month, that kind of thing. If you love that kind of writing, then you are definitely going to love A Study in Drowning. Moving on, I read a mystery, which isn't something I read that much on this channel, but I feel like I used to read so many mysteries, and that is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. So I've been seeing this everywhere. It's been so popular over the past few years on BookTube, and I have been so excited to pick it up and try it out, and it really did not disappoint me. So our main character spends his time basically pointing out the inconsistencies in other people's mystery novels. So he's very concerned about the rules in mystery novels. He talks a lot about them. He talks to the reader directly, frequently, constantly. If you don't like that, you're not going to like this book because he does it all the time. And so he tells you that everyone in his family has killed someone. He tells you that right at the beginning of the book, and that by the end of the book, it will be true. And it is. His whole family, they are taking a family reunion at this remote ski estate. I think it's set in Australia. And it turns out that his brother is being released from prison. It was really great. It was really a wild ride, I would say. I do think that the pacing of it wasn't totally perfect for me. I gave it a 4-star. I thought it was a little bit slow in the middle. But overall, this is something that we really need in the mystery genre, because I feel like what we have right now, or what we have had for the past few years, past 20 years probably, is we have thrillers and we have cozy mysteries. And things that are in between those are few and far between. And I like a cozy mystery sometimes. Sometimes I would really like to read about an adorable B&B that has a cat that solves mysteries and likes puns, but I don't want that all the time. And sometimes I want to read a thriller because sometimes I want to have that shocked feeling when they reveal the twist. But for the most part, I like a classic mystery. I like an Agatha Christie. I like an old school detective story. I want to feel like I could solve the mystery if I were interested in doing so. So I hope that we're going to see more mysteries that are kind of more in this vein. And I feel like we have seen some more being published. So that is very exciting for me. And I definitely need to get back into reading mysteries. And I need to read the sequel to this one, which is already out. And then I read the Stardust Grail. So this is kind of described as a stellar Indiana Jones story. And in some ways, I think it really is. Our main character is Maya, and she is a reformed thief. She has spent her time traveling the galaxy with this really interesting other species alien that she refers to as Uncle. And she's gone straight, right? She's going to school. She's going to be an archaeologist, but she's not going to be the kind that goes in the field. She's just going to do her research, write her papers, that kind of thing. But then she gets the call for one last job. And this one last job may be the thing that saves humanity or saves an alien species from extinction. And that's her dilemma. It felt very Indiana Jones to me. I really liked it. I gave it 3.5 stars. I thought it lost a little bit of steam toward the end. I didn't think the story really stuck the ending the way that I wanted it to, but I did really enjoy it. I think this is definitely an author. I know this is her second book that I will be watching. And I think that if you like your sci-fi to be adventurous, and again, you like a little bit of found family, because there's definitely a ragtag group that she's traveling the universe with in this book, I think that you would really enjoy it. So that is one that I would definitely recommend, and it is newly released in June, so check it out. I have one final book that I read for this month, and that is a novel love story by Ashley Poston, which I do have on my Kindle because I just finished it this morning. But I'll go ahead and put the graphic up here so you can get a look at how bright this cover is. So a novel love story is the story of Eileen. Eileen is an English professor who has traveled by herself to a cabin up in, I think the Adirondacks. I think they're in New York, in order to usually meet up with her romance book club that she meets up with every year. But this year, none of them could make it, but she is still going. She is going to spend a week reading trashy novels that no one that she works with is going to make fun of her for this time, and drinking wine and being in the jacuzzi and kind of trying to get over some of the things that have happened to her in her life. She has had a not super recent, but fairly recent breakup where her fiance left her a week before her wedding. She's just kind of closed herself off to love since then. She has a favorite series of romance books that she has brought with her. As she is driving up to this cabin, she slides off the road and finds herself in a small town from her favorite romance novel series. It's got all of the cute stores and shops. It's got a cafe. It's got an auto shop where if you get your oil changed, they give you a free bottle of hot sauce. And the one thing that is in this town that was not in the novels is a bookstore run by this mysterious, grumpy man who has a cat, by the way. A cat named Butterscotch. He's got a couple variations of that going on. Anyway, there's a cat, which, automatically bumps it up by 0.5 star for me. But this was a very cute book. I loved her getting lost in this fictional world that suddenly is real for her, and just her delight at meeting these characters. Because we've all had that experience, right? Where we have a series that we love so much, we feel like we know the characters, we know everything about them. We maybe think that we know better about how they should be living their lives than they think they know. And we would not be shy about telling them if we saw them in real life. And that's kind of where she is. And it was very, very sweet. There is a romance. The romance is, it's cute. There are a couple things I'm not going to spoil about it because I want you to be able to find those out for yourself. I will say that the thing that everyone in the reviews keeps going on about is the fact that Ashley Poston, for reasons, decides to describe the male main character as having mint green eyes. Okay, so I have light colored green eyes, right? But I don't think that anyone has ever described my eyes as minty, which she does constantly. At one point, she describes his eyes as like a pool of melted Mentos, which I don't even think Mentos are green, first of all. Maybe there are green ones, but most of them are white, right? So that doesn't make any sense. And I am picturing something totally different if you're going to use that descriptor. And I just thought it was hilarious. And I kind of feel like she had to be messing with us a little bit about the eyes because no one has mint green eyes. That's not a thing. So there's that. But the book is really interested in talking about, first of all, our main character, Eileen, who feels very left behind by her best friend and a lot of the people that she knows in her life, because all of the things that she thought she wanted or that she should want and that she almost had, she no longer has. And she's in her early 30s. She's not married. She has no prospects of getting married. She doesn't even know if she wants to have kids. She has a dead-end job that she doesn't even know if she likes. All of those things, are things that she's really struggling with, and she loses herself in these romance novels in order to get away from that. And then beyond that, the book is also a love letter to romance novels themselves, to the things that romance novels can do for us at times in our lives that maybe are not so happy. I mean, who that reads a romance novel has not done it at some point because it made them feel better about things that were going on in their lives? And it's very clear that Ashley Poston is not happy about the fact that there are so many people who dismiss romance as a genre as something less than, right? As we do with so many things, I think, that are primarily consumed by women, even though romance is the largest genre by sales in the publishing industry. It's still something that I think people look down on you for. And, if they come in your house and they see a bunch of romance novels, they're like, oh, do you read romance novels? And that's, not cool. Like, let's not look down on people for what they read. I read all kinds of things, and I'm not ashamed of the fact that I also read romance novels. It feels like something we shouldn't be doing anymore, and we shouldn't have to call out in books, but we do. And I really appreciate Ashley Poston for doing that. The ending of the book is very satisfying. In terms of like spice level, it's a little spicy. Not too much, like not crazy, and not until later in the book was fine for me. And I just thought it was very cute. So I gave this a 3.5 stars. I didn't like it as much as her first book, but I did like it better than the 7-Year Slips. So, if you want to rate your judgment off of how you liked those books, go ahead. 3.5 stars might bump it up to 4 for the cat. I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a really great way to close out my month of reading. So that'll do it for me for this month. I already put up my TBR video for July if you want to check out the things that I'm hopefully going to be reading, and I've already started my first book from that, which is Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Moore. So if you want to check out more of that, please subscribe. If you want to leave a comment, I always love to hear what it is that you have read this month that you really, really love. I hope that you all have a great week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.